Find a new way to live in Toronto's coveted Forest Hill neighborhood. Foray by Canderel blends thoughtful, livable suite design with refined finishes and more than 50,000 square feet of amenities, including wellness spaces, work-from-home areas, fitness facilities, and places to unwind. A modern, elevated community crafted for the life you've earned. Your next home starts from $599,000. Learn more at live@foray.ca. That's live at FORET.ca.
Shavuot approaches. The holiday celebrating the early harvest and the receiving of the Torah is at the end of this week, and we are taking this opportunity to discuss two things. One, why is Shavuot so overlooked as a holiday? And in light of a recent paper looking at the state of Jewish identity and status these days, we discuss how to have these conversations, whether the Torah and deep Jewish practice is sometimes left out of these conversations, and what is at stake for the future of Jewish life. All this and a special Shavuot textual healing at the end. I'm Avi Feingold, and along with Yedida Eisenstadt and Matthew Leibel, we are Not in Heaven. Hello, everybody.
Hi, friends.
Hi, Avi.
It feels like a half a week, even though it's only like 1 day cut off for Shavuot.
It was a holiday for a lot of places in Canada, too, on Monday. So it's like a short week at the beginning, too. So a bit of a compacted week. Yeah, for sure.
Yedida, how about you?
Keeping busy, trying to prep for Shavuot. We are going back to Nashville to visit and to teach. So I'm pretty excited to go back there and show the kids where they used to live.
Did you celebrate the 250th anniversary Shabbat this past weekend, as the leader of this country exhorted us to do? Did you hear about this?
What were you supposed to do?
I think I only heard about it after the fact.
Huh?
I did celebrate Shabbat.
Yes. Because it's the 250th anniversary of America coming up, this is basically this whole year. And so Trump signed a declaration that this was the Shabbat for the 250th anniversary of America. It caused a lot of people. I had somebody, when I first heard the announcement, I had somebody send it to me and said, never have I wanted to be Mechalel Shabbat more than like now, because Trump told me to keep Shabbat.
They are aware Shabbat's much older than the States, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
All right. Look, Shavuot is coming up. I want to start with that one just for a few minutes here. Matthew, you always have this as your personal bugaboo. You say nobody knows about Shavuot.
Nobody knows
about it. It's the least celebrated holiday.
It is.
Our producer, Zach, has advocated for the fact that he wants to switch Simchat Torah to Shavuot, especially post-October 7th, when Simchat Torah has been, quote-unquote, ruined
I think that's a good idea.
It's not a bad idea.
To me, the question is, I guess, to start thinking about this, why is Shavuot so overlooked?
Like, Shavuot to me is just, it's bad marketing in every kind of way. It has no marketability. You know, Hannukah evolved, Purim evolved. Those holidays have marketability. Shavuot doesn't even have an English name. It doesn't have a song.
The Feast of Weeks.
Super. Real catchy. Also, something Jews don't say. Like, there's a famous story. My Zeta was a principal, and then he had he was a superintendent, and he was taking off Jewish holidays to make an example for other teachers if they wanted to, right? And my Baba was a Yiddish teacher, and so my Zeta was not a religious man, but on days like Shavuot and days like the first couple of days of Pesach, and of course Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, he always took those days off in the public school system. And one time a colleague asked him, what holiday is it coming up that you're taking off? And he said, Shavuot. And he said, well, what's the name? What is that name in English? And my Zeta said, I got to go home and ask my wife. I have absolutely no idea. And unfortunately, I think if you found, 10 Jews in the non-Orthodox world who knew what Shavuot was, that would be their response for the English name. So while we kind of fancily know Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, these are not names that are used the way Passover is used, the way Hannukah is used, the way even like Purim is kind of translated, or, we don't. Shavuot's got no songs, no family ritual. It's got blintzes, cheesecakes, and most people are lactose intolerant.
Okay, so first of all, food is important. And
Sure.
I actually didn't know this until last year, but I mean, parts of this I knew, right? So Kashrut dictates that we're not supposed to have bread that is dairy. Mm-hmm. For example, like the OU won't certify bread that would need to be indicated that it's dairy, except on Shavuot, there is the practice of having dairy bread. So like they're like the food and the rituals and the dairy are all mixed up in the celebration of receiving the Torah. So I'm not sold that there isn't ritual and celebration. I think that the ritual and celebration typically are more communal than family.
That's what I'm saying. It's not family ritual. The way the Seder is, the way breakfast is, the way lighting the Hannukah candles is. But neither is Purim. Like, Purim is not a home holiday. Purim is a communal holiday, and that one they are kicking butt on. They figured out what to do with Purim. It's evolved.
It's a different kind
Shavuot
of
has
fun.
not.
To be fair, I think Purim is totally lost on the adults, and it's totally become a kid holiday.
That works. That's marketability.
It works for
That's
kids,
great.
but if you don't have kids or you're not a kid anymore, then you don't really celebrate Purim.
That's
be
fine,
fair.
but there's still a cyclical nature to it because there will always be kids. You know what? Like, you, Avi, your stories as at least a younger adult. It sounds like your Purim wasn't lost on you.
Oh, no.
Right?
Well, my Shavuot is not lost on me either.
Fine, fair enough. But my whole thing is that it all starts at the very beginning. Shavuot is not as clear in its origin as everything else, and it's been kind of muddy in its practice ever since. Like, I think it's at the beginning. It doesn't even talk about the Torah in the Torah. They had to go and figure that out after because it's all about agriculture. And then outside of Israel, people lost the flair for the first fruits. It was the holiday of the first fruits, right? It was kind of like the beginning of the summer.
Sure. Yep.
Like that. That was it. And in Winnipeg, what I do is I often like plant our plants. Like this weekend coming, we'll get like the annuals and stuff in there, and it just kind of coincides as a nice weekend. May long, a little bit later, whatever. But. And even part of it, like the yerek, like the blooming of the mountain and everything, that part of it, that's great. But I don't know, that's so soft compared to what all the other holidays bring with them as far as their quote unquote selling to the public. People don't grab on to a little bit of greenery or whatever.
But the other holidays also are, like Sukkot and Pesach also are agricultural holidays that get historical events mapped onto them. So
yeah, but those historical events are like they resonate. Sitting at the Seder, that's
getting
huge.
the Torah resonates.
Look, you're trying to argue against the fact that this is a fact. It doesn't resonate. I'm trying to tell you why. Because it doesn't resonate.
That's a fine why. That's all good. And according to a whole, does seem to be the reality on the ground. I, for better or worse, have lived mostly in communities of people who are intense, let's say, about their Torah study for most of my life. And so it was kind of news to me that Shavuot is a holiday that many Jews don't even know about. So this, I think, is it's the holiday for people who connect to their Judaism more, I would say, through intense Torah study rather than meals or Seder or different kinds of ritual.
Shavuot as a holiday of receiving the Torah has become a holiday for people who feel that they have received the Torah in their life. And if you don't feel like there is Jewish wisdom in your life, the holiday is basically lost on you. Because it's not about the culture. It's not about the fun, cool, practice-y sort of things. It's about knowledge. It's about learning things. And it's not a holiday, therefore, that resonates with people who don't necessarily have a regular learning practice about their Judaism.
So I'm deep in, what's Shavuot about, because I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to teach this week. And because of the conversation we're also about to have and thinking about Ruth and covenant and peoplehood, and that the thing really that separates Israel from the other nations is the Torah. It is the covenant. And so this really is the holiday of celebrating the thing that makes Jews different.
Isn't it interesting that a lot of Jews who still may feel very, very connected to their Jewish identity, for them, the study in the Torah is not it. It's in the background. It's the origin. But it is
that's
not
why
the
I'm
thing.
framing it as covenant, not Talmud.
Right. But I don't think people are
covenant,
thinking of it as...
it's still the thing that makes them Jewish.
Not if you ask them, though. Not if you ask them what makes them Jewish. And you have to be careful, I think, when you say that only the people who have had Torah in their life, people might not like the way you said that, Avi. It's a little bit on the aggressive side.
It is. But I mean, look, feel free to prove me wrong, people, because I want to meet those people who love the Torah but don't understand Shavuot. I've never heard of it.
But
I don't think that those people exist.
That's interesting.
I would also add ritual-wise, right? The thing that, it's relatively historically quite recent, but the staying up all night to learn Torah that apparently is only about like a 500-year-old tradition.
Yes.
Like,
have you read the paper about this, about how it's related to the rise of caffeine in Western Europe?
No, I have
Is
not.
it really?
This is a paper by Gila Klitenik, who shows there's a deep connection between those two things.
But it started a long, long time before coffee drinking was a thing, didn't it?
No, that's what Avi's saying.
It didn't?
I tripped on this like weird historical text over the last few weeks that also like is about the first Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and it's a bunch of Kabbalists who ended up staying up all night. One of them ends up like being inhabited by God. Anyway, the whole thing's weird. What I am trying to say is there is this practice, and I'm actually surprised that it has not become more widespread, sort of cross-denominationally, of like making staying up like a big fun event and engaging the kids. And I think that there is a move to do that in traditional communities, but I don't know so much beyond traditional communities, the extent to which that's like an effort and an opportunity.
I like where your head's at, Yedida, because when Avi asked his original question, it was two parts, where it was like, why is this like this? Which I think we've covered, but it's like, what are we going to do about it? If we're going to do something about it, what are the parts of Shavuot that you lean into, right? What is Shavuot? And to me, the Tikkun, like that's a logical place. Can you turn that into a bigger event? For the nearly 20 years that I spent in organized synagogue life, in conservative and left Judaism, no chance. Torah does not draw them in.
I don't know if that's true, because I can tell you in the communities where I have been a part of community-wide and not just Orthodox Tikkun Leil Shavuot, staying up all night, it is a highlight of the year for a lot of people. It draws in lots of people that are not Orthodox, and if it's done well, is actually a cool thing to do and should be replicated by saying, hey, we do this thing, it is cool, you should do it too. The downtown JCC in Toronto, the MNJCC, the Miles Nadal JCC, does Tikkun Leil Shavuot every year. They brought me in one year as a scholar in residence. I gave a few classes, and it was amazing. I mean, yes, the numbers trickle off towards 3, 4 a.m., but that happens everywhere. And they had teachers from across all the spectrum.
And we did that too.
It drew in a lot of people.
We did that too. I participated in a bunch of them, and they're always really fun. And I particularly love the communal nature of it. I'm just in big centers like that. Your draws are great. That's even in Winnipeg with an active community, we never had huge numbers.
But it also doesn't need to be huge. It needs to be at whatever size of people who are opting in and choosing to engage, right?
I'm just saying that it's the level of popularity. You have a Hannukah party, that thing sells out. You have a Purim party, that thing sells out. You have a Passover Seder, that thing sells out. The Tikkun does not sell out.
People can find their own way in. There are lots of different ways of connecting, and some people like this particular opt-in, and I
think it's people who have already opted in, though. Like, I think it's an insiders club thing for people who already do the Judaism. It's not one of those things where it's a touch point. I actually think the Karaites, you guys know about the Karaites in Shavuot, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. To me,
tell our listeners.
I will, but I think where the opportunity with Shavuot was lost, because Shavuot isn't ever given as a fixed date in the Torah, the way Pesach is given as the 15th of Nisan or examples like that, right? Or Sukkot, 15th of Tishrei. It's given as 7 weeks after you start counting, but it never actually says anywhere to count on the first of Pesach. That was our interpretation of a phrase in a parsha we did a few weeks ago, Emor, called the phrase is Mimachorat HaShabbat, the day after the Shabbat. Right? So a lot of people just assume that the Shabbat is kind of a euphemism or a way of stand-in for the first non-work day, which was the first day of Pesach, and then we start counting the Omer right away, 7 weeks, and then we have Shavuot. But the Karaites, what do we call them, guys? Like the Jewish literalists?
Arch-scripturalists.
Right.
Oh, I like that.
I knew you had something. They're more written law and not so much oral law. And when it comes to Mimachorat HaShabbat, the day after the Shabbat to start counting, they count after the first Shabbat after Pesach, which means Shavuot
is always on a Sunday.
Always on a Sunday. And if the Jews had a one Sunday a year, that is your marketability. Shavuot, marketed on a Sunday, never conflicting with the working schedule. You could get kids. You could have all night Saturday night slumber parties studying Torah. You could do it. You could have a sunrise service every Sunday. It would be amazing. That is what we need to save Shavuot. If it was always on a Sunday and no other Jewish holiday was linked to a Sunday, it would make it stand out, and the Torah and Shavuot would ride off into the sunset happily forever after. That's the answer. The Karaites have it.
That's an answer. But yeah.
Well, right now, Shavuot's on life
diplomatic.
support. So
There you go.
Pardon me for brainstorming.
Let's think about it. We got a year now to come up with better ideas. All right.
I challenge you.
On that note, let's move on to our main topic. The Hartman Institute recently released this white paper called Building Communities of Belonging, Jewish Identity, Conversion, Intermarriage, and Adjacency. It's written by Christine Hayes, a big scholar of rabbinic Judaism. The purpose of this paper was designed to spark conversations about a very difficult topic. And I'll read a quote from it, right? So contemporary demographic realities, including intermarriage and an increase in the numbers of Jewish adjacent individuals, are prompting some communities and organizations to reevaluate their definition of Jewish identity, their criteria for conferring Jewish status, and their policies and practices around intermarriage, conversion, and adjacencies. Today, non-Jewish spouses and family members, as well as Jewish adjacent individuals without marital ties to the community, contribute to organized Jewish life in myriad ways. They serve on synagogue boards, teach in Jewish educational institutions, and dedicate their personal resources, time, and labor to Jewish communal activities and causes. Nevertheless, the fear that Jewish adjacency will dilute or negatively impact the character of Jewish communities persists and should be openly discussed by communities evaluating their policies and practices. So this is basically a way for Hartman to say, let's have the conversations. Let's recognize that there are many, the term that they use as Jewish adjacent people within and around the Jewish community. So I guess I want to first start by thinking about this term that they use a lot, the idea of the Jewish adjacent individual. What do you guys make of this as a concept and a category? And does it solve, what they're trying to do here?
I'm not really sure what it is they're trying to do here, actually. That was kind of my question back to you when we got a chance. But Jewish adjacent to me, what I think of is somebody who's got a Jewish partner or Jewish kids or both, but isn't Jewish. I don't think of it as like my boss at Simkin, who is a CEO of a Jewish organization who's not Jewish.
So I think it actually was opening up like a huge spectrum and like allowing for people to define themselves as attached and connected to Judaism and Jewish community in a wide variety of ways. And so some of these people, are raising Jewish children and are very Jewish connected and are on boards of schools and synagogues and go to shul every week, I think would be sort of like a maximalist adjacency. Mm-hmm. But then, other ways that people identify with the Jewish community without necessarily identifying as Jewish. They define identity as something that is self-defined, right? Like a person decides their own identity.
Sure.
And it's the self-determination. And the way that they use status is that status is conferred on you by the larger community, right? So in this case, it's recognition of your identity, either as the identity that you would choose or the imposition of a community's identity on you, right or wrong, for example. So, saying to somebody who identifies as Jewish through their father and then telling them, no, you're not really Jewish, right? Like that's a community thing or vice versa, right? It can also be the other way.
That's a great breakdown. That's a status thing. That is your status is determined by the community versus your identity, which can be very personal. And then people can say, that's where you hear, I identify as Jewish, right? Like that's where I get that argument and I hear that all of the time.
And I think it also is worth saying that, right, the Hartman Institute published this paper in North America and talks about North America, but like we know that the Canadian scene is actually quite different than the American scene. And even the American scene in New York or Chicago or DC is totally different than in much smaller communities.
So, they're doing good work in laying out all of this framing, giving people the tools to have the conversation and wanting to have, I guess, that inclusiveness, right? As they say in the paper, I'm paraphrasing, but let's talk about unity and not uniformity, right? The idea that you can have Jewish unity without a uniform definition of what the people are. I have heard this term, to be fair, unity without uniformity. I usually hear it by an organization right before they're about to reject your position, right? I've had that experience multiple times. But anyways, so assuming that they really believe this and they believe this in good faith, they want to be able to show that we can be more expansive about our definitions and to not be the ones to impose what those definitions are on any given community, to say, hey, there are different communities and each one has their way of approaching this question. Let's recognize that these are important conversations and we need to be having them.
But I think that that's, like I said, Avi, I think that that's happening. I mean, what I see is going on is I see a lot of the, whatever you want to call them, non-religious Jewish organizations, camps, youth groups, schools, birthright, their broadening of acceptance on status, like who is Jewish, is way wider, way larger tent. It's just the religious angle, right? Like the family who comes to me, dad's Jewish, mom's not, kid wasn't converted, can we do a bar mitzvah? That kid can go to the camps, can go to the school, can go on birthright way more easily than having a bar mitzvah.
And don't you think that that actually is the unintended negative consequence of having a very expansive idea of Jewish identity without explaining to those people that your Jewish status is actually still in question?
Well, that's the rub in my life. And I'm living this like regularly. And I think that's the rub in Judaism today, is that we're still at the conservative and Orthodox level. There is a disconnect with what Reform has religiously embraced, and therefore there's a divide here between who is Jewish, who is not Jewish, based on the rules of the bigger umbrella. But the camp doesn't have to care. Anybody's Jewish. The school, and so you've got all of these institutions that are making it actually harder for the religious side because they're being more inclusive, and they're making the religious ones look obviously less inclusive. And no one wants to be labeled as that these days.
Which is no, that's not true.
Well, I mean, it's got a different baggage to it.
The communities on the right don't care that they're not being inclusive because they think that they're authentic and they're the ones maintaining the right, like they're the ones keeping and holding the faith and the tradition and preservers, and that like it's failing elsewhere. And that's I think part of why we're seeing this turn now, and part of why Hartman is initiating this conversation, because Jewish sociologists have known for a long time that this like anxiety about intermarriage, right? Like Avi just read the statistics, and it hasn't led to the sort of the implosion of Judaism that everybody thought was going to happen as a result of these high rates of intermarriage, right? These Jewish adjacent people.
It depends what you define as the implosion of Jewish community.
The rub, right? Is Judaism a religion or is it a culture? So if you want to go to the summer camps and have all of the experiences that are more of the cultural experiences, no problem. But once you move into the religious space where halakha has a more or lesser sway or a veto, which might be Mordechai Kaplan's language, but definitely is language that I got from an ex-boyfriend. The question of if religion has a veto, then you're really in a tough spot. But Judaism, like when does Judaism become a religion and when does halakha make a decision? And it's really only more in the religious spaces and less in the cultural spaces.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that question is actually sidestepped a lot in this paper.
I actually don't think it is. I think that what they've done when you get to sort of the history section is, here. So they go all the way back to the biblical period, and they identify that the original term ger meant somebody who maintains their identity and lives in the midst of Jews and has not become fully Jewish. And then eventually that term comes to be used for somebody who has fully adopted Judaism. So there's like this shift in terminology that happens. And what they also throw light on is that before the rabbis established conversion as the ritual by which you join the Jewish people, and this is what we see in the Book of Ruth, marrying in is that, and the language they use is both the motivation and the mechanism for joining the Jewish people, right? So we see before the rabbis that like marrying into the Jewish community and adopting Jewish practices and identifying as Jewish was all that it took. And then that breaks when the rabbis implement conversion and they actually discourage it for the purposes of marriage. So
the problem is, though, that by introducing that and then not talking about the fact that we are actually living rabbinic Judaism, even if you're not religious of rabbinic Judaism. That's what I'm trying to get at. That like we live in a framing that has been established. And when you think about Judaism, we are still living in a world that is defined by the way the rabbis defined Judaism.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to get at. We are still living in a rabbinic Jewish world. We are not living in a pre-biblical, in a biblical Jewish world.
Moses' children in the Torah were Jewish, but Moses' children today would not be Jewish.
That's fine that they don't care. But that's where you get to the question of status and identity. Like, again, I'm not here to define and to say you're not Jewish or you are, like, whatever.
Right.
Like, the questions that are being raised here are, they're good and they are important questions, and we have to be addressing these things. But by sidestepping so much of the contemporary discussion of what it means.
I don't think they're sidestepping it. I think that they're So first of all, the fact that this paper even exists and is coming out of Hartman is, like, to my mind, the nail in the coffin, the end of denominations, right? This is not a denominational paper. It's not speaking to a particular denomination. It recognizes the range from, like, Syrian Jews who require 2 Jewish parents for somebody to have a Jewish identity, and all the way. And I think this is part of why this paper is coming out now, is that they're identifying that there are plenty of people who identify as culturally Jewish who do not have a Jewish parent, and that there's no mechanism for people to join Judaism as a culture. And it picks up on this problem that people who study Jewish religion really are taken up with, which is that Judaism is not a religion the way Christianity is a religion, right? We also have this, like, ethnic cultural piece. And so the question of, like, who is a Jew and what makes them Jewish and how you become Jewish and how you become not Jewish is really impossible.
So I get to if I can paraphrase what you're saying to figure out what you're trying to get at, is that we used to have this definition of Judaism as a culture and as a religion, meaning a long time ago, we thought about this, like, you were identified by association. And if you wanted to associate, you associate. You didn't have to worry about conversion.
In the biblical period.
In the biblical period. Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, there are many people who don't want to convert, but want to have that Jewish cultural discussion, right? I want to be Jewish adjacent, and I actively want to be. But there's no conversation, there's no space for them, because we're still living technically in a world where it's really just about status and not about identity. And they want to open it up to status and identity and not just about status.
But hang on, it's a nice idea, but until they take care of the status part, none of it really matters.
Well, but this is about establishing a more formal status for these people who are Jewish adjacent.
But what ultimately will that be if it's not Jewish? It'll never be enough.
Says who, right? These are people who are choosing
who can't have a bar mitzvah.
To convert. No, they don't want to. The problem there is they want to identify as a thing, and Rabbi Matthew, you are not conferring that status on them.
Well, I don't find that I'm in the place to do that. I'm at odds with the rest of the community. I would much rather have something that was uniform. Who is Jewish?
So,
Jewish
wait,
people
Matthew,
can go up to the
let me ask you,
Torah.
if what you're saying, Matthew,
doesn't exist anymore.
So that's what Matthew is trying to get at, I think, is that the only people that seem to care about Jewish identity without Jewish status are people for whom they don't actually want to do anything halachic or don't want to have any associations with anything halachic. And the people that are halachic actually care about those things a lot. So what you're saying is it's not about denomination. It's about, do you care about the idea of Jewish status or do you not? And if you don't, eventually what's going to happen is what you're saying is that the liberal Jewish denominations that don't care about halacha are going to be able to confer status on anybody just by identity.
I think it's not fair or right or legitimate to characterize liberal denominations as not caring about halacha. They do have halacha. It is different than Orthodox halacha. They do have practices that dictate who is in and who is out. And what Hartman is saying is, right, like now, especially as denominations, I think, are breaking down and there's more of this range of options and it's becoming more local, right? They're encouraging communities to have these conversations. And that's like the implication there is irrespective of the denomination to which the community may or may not identify, right? So it's a very local how are we as a community conferring status and identity on the different people who are part of this community, some of whom may be halachically Jewish, some of whom may be intermarried, and some of whom may be adjacent?
So I don't disagree that there are liberal Jews, many liberal Jewish denominations and movements that believe in halakha. I'm not saying not. I'm not walking away. I'm not like ignoring that piece of it. What I'm trying to say is that eventually, if we go down this path, the communities for which halakha exists but is malleable and we get to decide and we get to establish, halakha gets a vote, not a veto, we have our modern way of approaching it, is eventually going to conflate identity and status. And there's not going to be a separate category anymore. There will not be. That is my prediction for status versus identity, because ultimately, do you buy a challah on Shabbat? Do you send your kid to a Jewish school? You're Jewish. And then you can get all the benefits of identity and all of that.
Including
of status,
including burial, including the bar mitzvah, including all the religious.
But by the way, the thing that I like about this argument is bringing it back to the communities, because I actually think that conversion was always a local thing and was never this national thing where we have to go and create these standards for everybody, because that actually disempowers communities to be able to say, yes, this person is a part of our community, or no, they are not. And I think that that's an important piece of what this is.
Ooh, I like that a lot, actually. I really like that a lot.
You know, I could talk about history and theory, and that's all wonderful and joyful, but at some point, decisions need to be made, right? So that's the hard part. But I think that the observation that before the rabbis came along and instituted this official practice, that like, I wouldn't even say that the boundaries were totally permeable, but I think that what we see and the argument made from Tanakh is that there was an easy mechanism for joining, and that was, you know, moving to a Jewish community, moving to an ancient Israelite Torah committed community, marrying into it, rejecting your other gods, making your, right? And this is what we see in Ruth, making your commitment to the Lord and denouncing other gods and marrying in and raising a Jewish family.
And now it's different though, right? Because you got to blend.
We've made it much more complicated, and
no. I
mean, further complicate it.
Because I mean, it's not like that. Then was enough. You know, you weren't going to marry into the Israelite community and still want to do Christmas with your parents. Right now it's a blend, right? Like it's a much more blend. You know, you're not worshiping idols, and it's not about Jesus, but you want to have Christmas with these kids' other grandparents. Like this is a reality. If you got 70% of the Jews are intermarried, think of that as 70% of the next generation are all having non-Jewish grandparents who just want to give their grandkids presents and have them at their house and have the dinner and all that stuff and celebrate that holiday. It's the fact that, are those people Jewish? Can you turn it on? Can you turn it off? Can you go and do your Christmas but still be Jewish if you're not halachically Jewish? Like, who's going to make this call? Who's going to make this call? Avi Feingold.
Well, so that I have the same question. Right?
Maybe the Tikkun Shavuot is for having this hard conversation.
Look,
yeah, I love it.
Here's the problem with that approach, right? According to me, at least. Here's my reason for disagreeing with all of this, right? Look, this is not the first intermarriage crisis we have had in the Jewish people, right? We've had crises the beginning of the Renaissance and the Haskalah, where people were like, oh, I could be hanging out with non-Jews. I'm going to hang out with non-Jews. People walked away from Judaism all the time. You just never heard from them because they were no longer part of the community. Nowadays, we have this idea, which is really underscored by this paper and everything that it stands for, of the loose ties to the community. Look, I think it's wonderful. Jewish adjacent, it's great. People like this stuff. It's nice that people are approving of it and are saying that Jewish culture is like another culture. It's like Irish culture or Italian culture and being part of these things, right? Great. I'm okay with that. But the insidious part about it is that the thing that unifies the people that are having these discussions, no one wants to hear the word no. Right? People want to have the benefit of the in-group without a commitment to the in-group. And that, to me, is a problem. That's the problem with creating the difference between status and identity. Right? It's great that you love this Jewish identity stuff, but you're play acting at it. Everybody wants to do what they want and not what anybody else does. Everyone wants to self-define. Everybody wants to submit, right? No one wants to submit to a human interpretation of a divine idea, or let alone a divine idea, right? And the fact is that if people want to pick and choose, that's not, to me, the very ethos of what Judaism is about. Judaism is not about challah and summer camp and going to shul. Judaism is about accepting the package, even if you disagree with the package, even if you say, I'm not going to be able to do that, but I recognize that that's part of Judaism.
Which is why I'm still, when I define my Judaism, I'm still matrilineal, because I'm not going against that. I think you said it well. Like you get fired up there, and I know, but it just shows that you've got a passion and you're thinking about it. Like I think you touch on a lot of points there. Judaism is not supposed to be easy peasy all the way. There's supposed to be a hardness to it, and the hardness to it is the level of the commitment. And I think that comes with the being Jewish.
So I think that what you're both saying discounts that there are like myriad reasons why somebody chooses not to become Jewish.
Of course.
And
I respect that. I don't think any less of this person.
But hold on. But Avi, I think you're also conflating that the category of Jewish adjacent, those people are actually, based on my reading of this, not asking for Jewish status. They're asking for recognition of adjacency, which is a different status than being Jewish. They're not saying, I want you to recognize me as Jewish. They're saying, like, I want to sit in shul and be allowed to open and close the ark, right? I know I can't have an aliyah, but I want to be able to celebrate my child's simcha.
Do you not think that there are people who are Jewish adjacent and want to be able to say that I want an aliyah? I don't want to have to convert in order to get an aliyah in my grandson's bar mitzvah.
The argument I think that this paper is making is that the community gets to locally decide on those boundaries. No, I don't think that that's what this is. I think that this is asking for rules and saying, what they can do, what they can't do, what they can expect, what that looks like. I don't think that this paper is making the argument that the people who are choosing adjacency must be recognized as Jewish. That's not what this is.
I find it curious that at the time when we're trying to create all of this diversity around Jewish adjacency, Jewish culture, Jewish identity, Jewish status, right, there is a push ever larger within the Jewish community that is having this conversation against whether you have to be Zionist in order to be a good Jew, or whether you have to be anti-Zionist. And there is a push to go and say, no. Everybody has to be Zionist in order to be considered Jewish. Otherwise, you're an un-Jew, right? To use the term the Gil Troy coined.
But Avi is all for the religious definition, and he doesn't care about your politics about Israel.
Well, no, hold on. Avi cares about Jewish status as a status because it is a religious thing, 100%. And I'm all for having different communities create their different understandings of what that status looks like. But you need to have a boundary. You need to have a status.
But can we sub in the word halachic rather than religious?
No, because I think a modern halachic interpretation in the Reform world is just as valid. But I think you need to have that status, and you need to be able to say, this is what it means to be Jewish, and you have to stick to it.
According to you, and I think that there's validity to this, the categories of religious Jew contrast non-religious Jew. And so if you're not a practicing Jew of ritual and belief and practice, then you're not X. But given that there are lots of different ways to decide and affiliate, including around politics and culture, we have for, hundreds or thousands of years privileged this religious identity over the cultural identity. And this is saying, okay, but wait a second, there are other ways to be Jewish, and how would somebody adopt Judaism in one of these other ways? And it complicates things and it makes it extra super messy, but we are already in a very messy place, like with Matthew's example of somebody who comes and, isn't matrilineally Jewish, but wants to do the thing.
I think it's a tough spot for the synagogues that aren't Orthodox. I'm really curious where they're headed, like conservative, reform, reconstructionist, because they're going to be facing this tomorrow.
What you're saying, Yedida, is all well and good, but I don't think that we as a population, as a Jewish population in the diaspora, Orthodox or not, religious or not, halachic or not, is equipped to have this biblical identity issue come back. We're not ready for this biblical Judaism and Jewish adjacent and thing. I think we have moved on from that for so many reasons. No, we have it as a de facto because we've been willing to ignore status all the time and welcome in all of these people and to say, oh, we're not sure. Come in, be part of this. I can't give you an aliyah right now, but I don't want to think about it because I don't want to say no to you. I don't want to say no to you.
Let's think about it.
This is starting that, but it's in a way that doesn't really allow people who are saying, no, I don't want this person in my community to walk away with dignity because everybody else is doing it. I have to be the bad guy. And I don't like that. I don't like saying that the people that say no.
Talk about it.
No, I want to talk about it. I want to welcome these people, but I want to be able to be very clear the same way to say this is what status is, and it's okay to have status. We are not going back, for example, to biblical sacrifice, which is the entirety of the biblical practice of God worship was sacrificing animals. We are not going back to that. And if somebody said we should try to go back to that, we would say it doesn't make sense. We're not in that world. The same way we are not in the world of saying, right, because we have established for so long this idea of status, putting this biblical idea of identity onto the current world of status doesn't make sense anymore. I see what they're trying to do, but I don't like it.
I don't think that they're arguing that everybody should be able to self-identify and decide they're Jewish and then they're Jewish. I don't think they're saying that either. I think that they're presenting historical pieces as how we got to where we are and how it worked then and how it has
But that's
changed.
A bad faith argument because they're opening that up to people saying, you see, we used to do it all the time. We should be able to do it again.
I think the decision's been made. I think with the schools, the camps, birthright, I think everybody on one side, like I think there's a tension there that the religious side is never going to get that side to go back. So status is being pulled away from the religious side, Avi.
I don't disagree with the reality of the facts on the ground. And I think that we have to have these conversations. I don't not like the importance. I don't disagree with the importance of having these conversations. What I disagree with is the manner and the types of people and the exclusion of the people who say status is a big deal from these types of conversations.
And if you know somebody who like changed and converted, you know what they went through. You know, it's a huge thing. Yeah. Great topic. Great convo.
Let's move on. Let's move on to textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing. Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Yedida, talk to us about the Torah of Shavuot.
Okay, good, because that's all I prepared.
There is no Parsha anyway, so it doesn't matter.
I have been thinking about Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, as sort of the metaphorical marriage ceremony between God and Israel. And the reason I've been thinking about that is that I recently learned that there's this Sephardic tradition of reading a ketubah before Torah reading on Shavuot.
Oh.
And right, because if the giving of the Torah is that marriage ceremony, then you have to read the terms beforehand. So we have one of these, a Kabbalistic ketubah from, I think, the 17th century in the Posen Library. So I was like going through it and reading it. And anyway, it's led me in a bajillion different directions. But I think it's really interesting to sort of see this like poetic explanation of the terms laid out as in like a contractual form, like this is what he's going to do, this is what she's going to do. God promises to provide for his bride Israel, just like a Jewish man promises to provide for his wife. And in turn, she makes these other commitments. But I mean, things that stood out were that Israel will continue to keep the covenant of Abraham and do circumcision, and is committed both to the written Torah and the oral Torah. And the different pieces like that. Anyway, so I've been playing this out further in my head. And I think that in Exodus 19, at the beginning, those first few verses are basically like God's proposal. And Moshe is the shadchan, Moshe is the matchmaker. And the Torah is really explicit that like God says this to Moshe, and Moshe goes and says it back to the people, and the people respond, and then Moshe takes it back to God. And for those of you who've, dated traditionally, sometimes it really is helpful to have like a matchmaker running interference between the two parties involved. But God says to Israel, you saw that I beat up your old boyfriend in Egypt, right? Like I beat up, this is my commentary on those verses, but like you saw that like I defended you and I took you away from like that terrible situation. And, now I'm offering you this special status and to provide for you and to take care of you. And if you say yes, then you will be my segula, my treasured nation. And then at the end of that verse, God says, Ki li kol haaretz, that you'll be my treasured nation from all the peoples. Ki, which could mean and or but in this case, but all of the land is mine. So Rashi explains there that we, Israel, should not think that we are the only nation that God cares about, but rather God cares about all of the nations, but we will have this special relationship with God, really to sort of serve as the priests, as the Kohanim, the people who mediate between God and the rest of the world. And you can sort of see that theme all over Tanakh and rabbinic literature. And I think it offers an interesting framework for like what the Torah is and does to us as God's people, and also, does for the larger world.
Cool. Very cool. So as you mentioned, the Torah reading for Shavuot was it's in the Parsha that's Yitro. And it's got chapter 19 and then 20 in Exodus. And chapter 20 has Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments. And I think I'm going to do a Rashi a week for a year for Yedida. I love when you look at the Ten Commandments, or the Decalogue, if you want to have a little bit of fun. The one for Shabbat starts Zachor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho, with this really interesting verb, Zachor. A lot of people know it, but Rashi points out that it's a construct. We don't really have it in English. The nerds will like this, like you guys. It's the infinitive absolute. Most people think of the infinitive as like to walk, to run, but in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, they have this thing called the infinitive absolute, which adds an emphasis to the word, and a lot of times it gets paired like mot tamut, right? Like surely you shall die, not just death you will die, but you should definitely die. It becomes more emphatic. And so Rashi says that zachor is the verb form of this infinitive absolute, and he says there's other places like haloch, uvacho, where it's more like walking, weeping. And the explanation he gives is cool. He says you should remember Shabbat almost like you're always remembering Shabbat. It's totally active, so that if you're during the week and you find some great food, you should set it aside and save it for Shabbat. Right? That's the example he uses, that you don't just remember it when Shabbat rolls around, but you're constantly measuring your life as how close you are to the next Shabbat, right? Shabbat is always present. That's what it really means. Rashi says, Zachor at Yom HaShabbat. So I kind of thought that was a cool one for a little textual healing on Shavuot.
Lovely.
10 Commandments.
All right, I'm going to move to the Haftorah of the first day of Shavuot. We read the
Ezekiel.
10 Commandments. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
The Haftorah for Yitro is from Isaiah, and the Haftorah for Shavuot is from Yecheskel. And if you look at the different visions for which we talk about Isaiah and Ezekiel, the Talmud has a whole discussion about why Ezekiel's is very short and brief, and Yecheskel is all of these visions, the dry bones, the Masa Merkava, the chariot, and all of this. Like, why is it so expansive? And there's all of these different reasons given. One, Isaiah was from the city, so he was cultured and he was refined, and Yecheskel was from the country, and he therefore didn't have access to so much thinking about this stuff, and he was more open, like he was more like, oh my God, this is so cool, right? When, like the country bumpkin or whatever. There's so many, and the commentators get into it. Yeshaya had a higher level of prophecy, so he was easy to like move away from it very quickly, versus Yecheskel, who was, it was a lower level of prophecy, but that meant that he was more blown away by it, and he felt like all the need to expand. What I find interesting about the fact that there are two different experiences recorded of the vision of prophecy and of having this notion of prophecy is that we are all very different. We can have the same experience. And this is really, if you're not seeing this subtext, this is going back to our main discussion. We can all have the same experience of something and feel it differently and experience it differently, and have those voices are just as valuable and just as important and part of the community to be able to value all of those things. And so if you are all effusive, if you're a chassid and you talk about the level of God and everything's great, everything's wonderful, yes, we love it, great. And if you are somebody who just says, yeah, whatever, spirituality, I want to move on, I'm not denying it, I want to talk about other things, that's good too. If you want to be this, you want to be great. If you want to be that, great too. And that is one of the major lessons of Shavuot.
Amen.
And maybe you even like Shavuot.
For itself, exactly. All right, happy Shavuot, everybody. Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate. Textual healing. Please don't ever put that in.
Did they ever?
I'm sure Zach is saving every time I sing in between there to to put a montage together.